incredibly a well-spoken person who enunciated and essentially was able to succinctly state what he felt was wrong with the current system and offered solution. He and the Third Estate marched out due to archaic rules of the convention, such as dress codes, unequal voting, and also disagreements with the king, the new government. So he was a member of the Tennis Court Oath, essentially creating a new government and promising to do better. And he was an active member, so he was storming the Bastille. He actively lived his philosophy. He was not an ivory philosopher in sitting in his ivory tower and pontificating on what people should do. He was actively living this and trying to make change himself. And he joined the Jacobin Club, argued for the removal of the king and anything related to Catholicism. However, later he would state that these higher ideals, such as a god, can still contribute to society. There were many problems that plagued the revolution. So King Louis tried to flee the country as his power was dwindling in the revolution. So Robespierre has to grapple with the idea of what to do with the king. Because on one hand, he is against the death penalty. He hates the death penalty. However, keeping the king alive could possibly lead to the end of the revolution and him being reinstituted into power. He essentially argued that in order to keep the revolution alive, he needed to kill the king. And essentially, this was a death that was worth it. Essentially, major pivoting factor where he pivoted his ideas of being okay for some punishments for the betterment of people. This ultimately goes on to the war. So Austria and a coalition of monarchs, essentially the European powers, invaded France after the French president declared war due to growing tensions and aggressions. Robespierre opposed the war. He believed that war would lead to the death of the revolution for some messiah figure who would claim glory and be able to convince the military in order to overthrow the revolution. So the Reign of Terror. So Robespierre's descent. He essentially streamlined the court system. There was only the judge and the death penalty. So this was also another idea, equality in punishment. Everyone would suffer the same punishment, the guillotine, essentially known as the natural razor. The government was very corrupt, and Robespierre executed multiple factions due to this believed corruption. He essentially dedicated himself to preserving the revolution. He also suspended free speech. He believed that the country was plagued with traitors inside and also abroad. We know that there's accounts of tens of thousands of people. These people were not given fair trials at all, and he was plagued with paranoia. He believed that everyone was out to get him and out to kill the revolution. Let's talk about court reform. He essentially believed that terror was necessary during times of revolution because virtue would not be able to sustain itself unless they cracked down on those who are unvirtuous. This is an actual quote from one of his speeches. Purges. So his party silenced and killed anyone who was found to be corrupt. Like Danton, I previously mentioned, he was actually corrupt. Many people in the government were actually incredibly corrupt. Robespierre, as far as we know, never took any government bribes. He was incredibly devout to this idea of the revolution, and he basically did nothing else except help in this revolution. He dedicated his life to it. He believed that there were two parties in society, and this kind of goes along with the court reform and the execution. So there are the people and those who wish to undermine the people, the enemy of the people, the enemy of the state, the enemy of the democracy. As we talked about, the government is held up by the people, and the people help and hold the government reliable. But there are also those who try to undermine it, and those are the second party. Those are the enemies, and they must be eliminated. And also, he argued that these crackdowns were necessary because the revolution was under threat due to the war that he himself did not want to start, but was started, and France was also currently losing the war. So his fall. So what led up to his fall? and his eventual death. So first we need to go back for a second. So we talked about the elimination of religion throughout the world. So the cult of the Supreme Being, essentially, the revolution had eliminated any presence of the church in France. However, Robespierre still believed that a deistic cult could still contribute to society and made people more virtuous. He essentially believed that a deistic cult, people worshiping and in general an idea of a higher power would help people become more virtuous and help them become better citizens of the greater revolutionary society. So he created the cult of the Supreme Being, which was essentially a deistic cult where they would just worship the power above. And they never stated what it was, and it was more an abstract concept. However, this was strangely modern for our time of like agnosticism and just generally believing in something but not actively practicing and not actively doing any rituals or being confirmed into a church or anything like that. So he wrote this manifesto on the cult of the Supreme Being, and he created the religion, and he was at the helm of it due to him being in a powerful place in government. So he held a festival of reason. This is a picture of the festival of reason. Now, this was held in Paris. Now, I don't know if you've been to Paris, but there isn't normally a mountain like this. So how did this mountain get here? Well, it's very simple. He built it. He held a festival of reason. Now, when we think of prophets, we usually think them in Abrahamic religions of them coming down from a mountain with enlightened ideas. Now, he held a festival to the idea of reason. So, he held a festival of reason. A festival of reason was held, and later a festival of the Supreme Being was held. He was at the forefront of it, and he gave a speech from this mountain that you can see in this photo here. This festival was held in France. Now, if you've been to France, there is not a mountain like this. There is not a mountain that's strangely shaped. There's not pillars like this. Now, where did this mountain come from? How do you get a mountain in Paris when Paris does not have a mountain? It's very simple. You build one. So Robespierre contracted people to build him a mountain. And this is the mountain that we come to see in this photograph. This is the mountain that we see in this portrait. So, this is the mountain we see in this. This is the mountain we see in this photograph. This is the mountain we see in this painting. Now, he also held a festival of reason and later on a festival of the Supreme Being. He was at the head of the church. We previously talked about this, and he would give speeches on top of the mountain seen is in the painting. Now, this mountain is in Paris. If you've been to Paris, there's not a mountain like this. So, how did this mountain come to be? It's very simple. He built it. He hired people, and they He hired people and built this mountain. He imported a bunch of dirt and rock, and they, over the course of a few weeks, came up to make this mountain. And he would preach and speak from the top of it. Now, also, there was a prophetess in Paris who was forming a cult of her own, and she believed she was the reincarnation of Mary and would give birth to another Messiah. And they believed that Robespierre was the reincarnation of John the Baptist. So they started worshiping him themselves. They started worshiping him themselves. So Robespierre builds his mountain, creates his own religion, and people start to worship him. Now, obviously, this starts to get people to really distrust him and also think that he was incredibly power hungry. And also, so following 1794, Robespierre started to become incredibly reserved, and he was not attending any meetings, any political debates, any legislative assemblies, and he talked to very few people. He was incredibly isolated and would only converse through longly worded letters. So, people started to get nervous due to his paranoia. He had these purges that we previously talked about, and he just created this new religion where people were worshipping him, and he was trying to gain more and more power, or so they believed. Obviously, history is written by the winners, and he was the loser. He started to fall ill frequently, and he was reportedly to look awful, and he was reportedly to be frail and just in general of very bad health. So, after not appearing for months, as we talked about his isolationism, he barges into the convention. So after not appearing for months, Robespierre returns to the convention and gives an incredibly rambling 2.5 hour long speech. This speech essentially his speech fundamentally defended himself against perceived criticisms, and he announced that he had a list of traitors. However, he refused to give names. It was an incredibly rambling speech, as we mentioned, and it was an incredibly uncouth speech, and he was generally perceived to be insane, and he essentially threatened to kill basically everyone in the room. People believed that they were going to be killed because he refused to give names, and everyone in of themselves believed they were going to be killed. So they all started to get incredibly nervous, and the next day they essentially all came together and arrested Robespierre. Now, obviously, as we can see in this painting of all the chaos, now there was no armed, and there was no. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you have a great day, week, night, fortnight, month, year, decade, century, millennium. If you had a Thanksgiving meal, I hope that meal was great. I hope you had like turkey, or I don't know, what's a good Thanksgiving meal? I know seafood, like clam chowder. Clam chowder is a great Thanksgiving meal. You know what's also a great Thanksgiving meal? Subway. I think Subway is a great Thanksgiving meal. You can use your, I think Subway is a great Thanksgiving meal. You can use your Riverhawk dollars and get a foot-long sub. Truly great. Even though it's 11 inches, it's still a foot-long sub, okay? And I think that that's the most thankful Thanksgiving meal that anyone can have.